Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something absolutely fascinating, the evolution of an economy. We'll be looking at exactly how a country's economic DNA is built, managed, and ultimately transformed over time. Let's just dive right in. To kick things off, I want to hear a pretty relatable scenario straight from our source material. Imagine a student named Anita. She opens the morning newspaper, and the headlines are practically shouting at her. Government plans to disinvest its shares in a few companies. Right next to it, there's another article about sick public sector units taking heavy losses and facing closure. She's puzzled, and not about the basics. Her questions are bigger. Like, what does a massive disinvestment strategy actually mean for the market? And how do governments go about untangling themselves from these failing industrial units? Well, by the end of our explainer today, you, just like Anita, are going to understand exactly what these massive macroeconomic shifts mean and why they happen in the first place. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. First, inside the mixed economy. Second, 3 public sector models. Third, the 1991 economic pivot. Fourth, reforming sick units. And finally, the global enterprise era. All right, let's start with section 1, inside the mixed economy. Looking at this visual map, we can see exactly how the Indian economy is sliced up. It's what we call a mixed economy. That basically means private enterprises, which are owned by individuals or groups, and government-owned public enterprises are operating side by side. You'll also notice those multinational corporations stepping into the arena right at the edges of the map. But to truly grasp that larger global picture, we first need to understand how the government manages its very own pieces on the board. Which brings us to section 2, 3 public sector models. So, the very first and oldest framework is the departmental undertaking. Think of this as a direct extension of a government ministry. It doesn't even have an independent legal status. Their funding comes straight out of the government treasury as an annual appropriation, and any money they make, that goes right back into the treasury. Classic examples of this would be the railways or the Post and Telegraph Department. Because they're directly managed by civil servants and ministries, they offer incredibly high public accountability. But here's the catch, and why this matters. Because every single penny has to be approved by the Treasury, rapid business decisions are nearly impossible. It fundamentally prioritizes accountability over agility. Now, to solve that distinct lack of agility, the government uses a second model, statutory corporations. These are actually brought into existence by a special act of Parliament, which explicitly defines their powers and functions. Unlike those departmental undertakings we just talked about, these are independent corporate bodies. They can sue, be sued, and acquire property entirely in their own name. They're independently financed, often borrowing from the government or the public, and they actually get to keep and use their own revenues to fund growth and operations. It's a pretty big shift. When you contrast these two side by side, the leap in autonomy becomes completely obvious. On the left, you've got departmental undertakings tied directly to the Treasury and run exclusively by government civil servants. On the right, statutory corporations enjoy independent borrowing and a high degree of operational flexibility, and they're run by non-civil servant employees. It's a very clear, deliberate attempt to merge the overarching power of the state with the kind of operational hustle you usually only see in private enterprises. And then we have the third pillar, which introduces a really fascinating paradox: the government company. Established under the Companies Act of 2013, these entities are designed purely for business purposes. They act just like private entities, competing in the open market against any other private or public limited company. They enjoy significant autonomy in their management decisions and are actually exempt from standard government accounting and audit rules, though, their annual reports still have to be presented in Parliament. It's essentially the government actively trying to play the capitalist game on an even playing field. So what actually makes them a government company if they act so private? Well, notice that 51% threshold on the breakdown here. A government company is legally defined as any company where not less than 51% of the paid-up capital is held by the central or state government. And here's a really fantastic little detail. These government shares are actually purchased in the name of the President of India. So the government maintains the controlling stake, but purposefully opens the door for private shareholders to fill up the remaining 49%. Moving on to Section 3, the 1991 economic pivot. Tracing this timeline reveals a truly massive macroeconomic shift. Historically, the government took on heavy investments in infrastructure, mainly because the private sector just didn't have the capital to do it. Back in 1956, 17 vital industries were locked strictly behind government doors. But flash forward to 1991, and a radical industrial policy slashed that number down to just 8. By 2001, it plummeted even further to just 3 exclusive industries: atomic energy, arms, and rail transport. The government dramatically pivoted away from heavy, centralized state control and moved toward liberalization, purposefully opening the doors for intense private competition. Which directly answers that question about market implications that was puzzling Anita at the start of our explainer. Disinvestment is simply the sale of government equity shares in these public sector enterprises over to the private sector and the general public. The main goal here was to release massive amounts of public resources that were locked up in non-strategic enterprises, helping to reduce the public debt burden. But more importantly, this transfer of commercial risk meant the government could finally stop funding endless losses and start letting the open market actually dictate success or failure.
Next up, Section 4, Reforming Sick Units.
As the public sector was suddenly forced to compete in a newly liberalized market, well, many older, inefficient enterprises just couldn't keep up. They started accumulating huge, unsustainable losses. The policy essentially became sink or swim. Viable units were sent over to the Board of Industrial and Financial Reconstruction, or BIFR, for intense restructuring and revival. Meanwhile, unviable units faced absolute closure. Now, obviously, shutting down massive public employers led to significant worker resentment. To impartially manage this socioeconomic fallout, the government created a safety net called the National Renewal Fund. This provided compensation and voluntary retirement schemes, although in reality, those resources were often stretched incredibly thin. And finally, Section 5, the Global Enterprise Era. You see, those 1991 reforms didn't just invite the domestic private sector to compete, they threw the doors wide open to foreign direct investment. This invited the rapid rise of multinational corporations. These global giants operate with huge capital resources, easily tapping into international banks and global capital markets. They use foreign collaborations, teaming up with local companies to seamlessly share patents, brand names, and logistics. They heavily leverage advanced technology and aggressive marketing strategies to just quickly dominate new markets. And finally, despite their vast network of international branches, they maintain strict, centralized control from their home country headquarters. They operate on a staggering scale that goes far beyond a single nation's borders, fundamentally altering the competitive landscape of the mixed economy. So we've traveled from the highly controlled departmental undertakings of the early post-independence era through the massive liberalization of 1991, all the way to the fiercely competitive, globalized market we see today. We've watched the traditional public sector intentionally shrink to make way for immense private and international expansion. Which leaves us with a pretty compelling question. As global enterprises continue to expand their massive reach, what does the future hold for the ultimate balance of a mixed economy? It's a fascinating thought to end on, and I really hope this explainer has given you a powerful new lens through which to view the economic headlines of tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep learning.